Hello everyone and welcome to Smart World with CNBC. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue dans Smart World avec CNBC. Je suis ravie de vous retrouver pour ce format 100% hybride. At the top of this program, les premières doses de vaccins sont enfin arrivées aux États-Unis. Pour l'instant, seulement 3,2 millions d'unités pour 21 millions de travailleurs de la santé. Les laboratoires et le gouvernement américain partagent d'ailleurs un cloud sécurisé afin d'échanger sur la distribution du vaccin. Le PDG de l'entreprise de cybersécurité Scaler répond à Jim Cramer à la suite de plusieurs tentatives d'espionnage lors des derniers jours. Après le Sénat, en mai, la Chambre des représentants a adopté un texte de loi renforçant les audits des entreprises étrangères cotées aux États-Unis. Le New York Stock Exchange et le Nasdaq s'opposent fermement à cette initiative. Welcome to Smart World with CNBC. C'est parti, let's go. Across the country, state health departments are preparing local hospitals for the first shipments of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. Un premier container vient d'arriver aux États-Unis. Le premier envoi devrait couvrir les vaccinations de 3,2 millions de personnes. Selon les autorités, c'est encore loin d'être suffisant pour les 21 millions de travailleurs de la santé américaine. On écoute.
Local leaders weighing both health and economic concerns to decide who gets doses and when. Here's CNBC's Meg Terrell.
As states make their plans for where to send the first vaccines, it's a moment of hope.
Once they give the approval, the shipment goes, and we know that this is happening, and the light at the end of the tunnel just got a little bit brighter.
But it's also the start of an incredibly complex process. As soon as the FDA gives the go-ahead, enough vaccine doses for 3.2 million Americans will be shipped out. States get an allotment based on their population size. For California, it'll be 327,000 doses. For tiny Rhode Island, 10,000. In Kentucky, 38,000. The plan for the vaccine is different in every state. For health systems like Providence, with 51 hospitals across 7 states, that means 7 different strategies. Chief Clinical Officer Dr. Amy Compton-Phillips says that could lead to potential inequities.
Think about if you happen to live right across the state line. Imagine that if in the hallway you can't get the vaccine no matter how much you want it, and this other whole population of nurses has it.
And while health workers and nursing home residents are first, some areas like Connecticut are communicating now about when other groups will be able to get a shot. Maybe not until June for younger, healthy people. But in Nassau County, New York, they're already starting a campaign.
The quicker we can get out there with a message that people can connect to and that they can trust, the better off we'll be.
And Shep, this is going to happen really fast. Next week on Thursday, FDA's team of outside advisors meets, and the FDA could decide any time after that.
Meg, these vaccines require 2 shots a few weeks apart, right? But we've been trying to find out how people are going to learn when they need to go back for their second. Have you gotten anywhere?
We have been learning about that. So different places are going to do it in different ways. There will be some electronic messaging, emails, text messages, but Operation Warp Speed is actually planning something pretty old school as well. They're including vaccine cards, and these are little paper cards that'll fit in your wallet. They'll tell you which vaccine you got, when you got it, and when you need to go back for your next shot. So when you do go back, you get the right one at the right time, and that is really important.
I'll say, Meg Terrell, thank you.
Les responsables gouvernementaux souhaitent également que certaines de ces premières doses soient distribuées à 5 agences gouvernementales. Ce serait le ministère de la Défense, la Maison-Blanche et le département des anciens combattants qui seraient prioritaires. Vous avez d'ailleurs certainement entendu parler de l'opération Warp Speed, un partenariat public-privé initié par le gouvernement américain pour faciliter et accélérer le développement et la fabrication, puis la distribution du vaccin. Pour cela, la Maison-Blanche et les sociétés pharmaceutiques partagent un cloud sécurisé mis en place par la société Scaler, une plateforme qui n'est pas non plus à l'abri de cyberattaques. Scaler CEO Jay Chowdhury explains how pharmaceutical companies are working with the cloud information security provider to fend hackers from accessing COVID-19 vaccine information.
You know, Jay, one of the things that you taught me that I want other people to understand is you used a great analogy. Use that international airport analogy, because it is hard for people to understand that you could do 140 billion transactions and check everybody's passport, but somehow Zscaler does that.
Yes, and it's not only just checking passport. The hardest part is checking the luggage to make sure nothing bad slips through the luggage on the plane. It's the same way when you go to internet or somewhere, that malicious stuff, even COVID fake masks and test kits are hidden in there. So we open it up, we inspect for bad stuff to keep it out, and we inspect to make sure the good stuff, your company confidential data doesn't leak out. That's really what's the intellectual property we created, which is a big barrier to entry for anyone to do it at a speed where you're not slowing down the traffic. Imagine if traffic inspection at the airport is slow, we all complain. Same thing will happen. That's what we did to build this fast technology with good security is what sets us apart and makes it very hard for anyone else to catch up.
All right, so Jay, we have an operation in our country called Operation Warp Speed. We're trying to get these needles into people's arms as fast as possible with the right information, with the right medicine. Are you confident? Are you confident that that this IP is not being hacked and stolen for all the billions that we're being spending? Are you confident about the process?
I am. I can't name names, but there are a number of pharmaceutical companies who are working with us to make sure none of the bad actors can come and try to hijack or try to steal the IP. So it's important. So we play a piece in this equation. And the important piece is who can get where. And then we work with the ecosystem of partners.
Les chercheurs en sécurité d'IBM affirment d'ailleurs avoir détecté des actions de cyberespionnage cette semaine. Les hackers essayaient de collecter des informations vitales sur l'initiative de l'OMS et la distribution du vaccin Covid-19 dans les pays en développement. La Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency des États-Unis a par la suite publié un avis encourageant l'opération Warp Speed de mettre en place de nouveaux pare-feux. La semaine prochaine, les grands électeurs seront appelés aux urnes afin de confirmer le vote des élections présidentielles. Les cas de trahison sont très rares et pour le moment, il semblerait que Joe Biden soit toujours le candidat élu. Après une pandémie dévastatrice, le président devra s'occuper de remettre sur les rails l'économie américaine. Former National Economic Council Deputy Director explains to CNBC the economic challenges faced by the Biden administration.
Joining us now to discuss is Andrew Olman, former National Economic Council Deputy Director under President Trump, and Ben Harris, the former economic advisor to President-elect Biden. All right, gentlemen, we've heard from each of your former bosses, and now we'll hear from you. And Ben, I'll give you the first question because it seems that both sides of the aisle now agree that there is an urgent need for stimulus, but perhaps interestingly from the President-elect last hour, he was extremely coy about his interactions with Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, but he repeatedly said that he's encouraged. Do you read that to mean that perhaps they've spoken and he's gotten some sort of signal from McConnell that he's willing to move forward?
So I can't comment on that. I don't know. But I think right now when we look at the current economy and look what's needed and the potential harm over the next 2 quarters, it's pretty clear to people on both sides of the aisle. Those statements from Larry Kudlow and from the president-elect said it all, which is that we're looking at an awful 2 quarters, 20 million people on unemployment, 12 million could fall off at the end of the year if we don't get more stimulus. So it's pretty clear what our economy needs. And, that's a bipartisan concern right now.
Andrew, political capital is not infinite. The appetite for compromise is not limitless. And now President-elect Biden has said that not only does he want to advocate for this bipartisan stimulus package, but they're going to need more after January 20th. And I'm wondering how much that shortens the agenda and how much the Republicans will be willing to advance more of his priorities here.
I think this is a one step at a time. Let's work on this bill first, and then look into next year. There does appear to be a bipartisan deal coming together. I've said for a long time that if you look at both sides and what they want out of a stimulus deal, it's really an issue of degree and not of kind. Most of the key programs they both support. And as you've seen this group of moderates come together with this compromise package, it really shows that there's not a lot of daylight now that we kind of get the numbers down to what's more practical. So I do think there's a real chance for this more targeted approach passing by the end of the year.
course, the incoming administration will also need support from Republicans on nominations. We got the rollout of the boldface names on the economic team this week. Andrew, I'm curious how you read the members of the team, what you think it signals about what the incoming administration will do, or when it comes to what the Trump administration did, what it will undo.
Well, listen, I think the nominees so far are certainly people who are good, respected people who I think view the economy the same way, and economic policy the same way that Joe Biden does, which is appropriate. The one piece I would note is the so far kind of lack of real world business experience. Historically, presidents, as part of that economic cabinet, have somebody with some who's actually had to make a payroll. Certainly it's important to have academics and former government experience is critical to that team. I mean, that's the piece that as I look for future appointments on whether or not they're actually going to have some real world business experience as part of that economic team.
But Ben, clearly the recovery is slowing down a bit, and we can all understand the case for why stimulus is needed in the short term with the case count rising as fast as it has been. That said, if we snapshot growth for 2020 as it's likely to come in around 3 to 4% lower than 2019, should that actually, in a relative sense, be applauded if places like the UK will be down double digits and the rest of developed world, Europe, will be down high single digits? Is it actually a fairly impressive handling of the economy, all things considered, in 2020?
No, I don't think that 2020 could be declared a success by anyone's metric. I understand it was worse in other places, but it's also much better in other countries. We saw caseloads that were lower. Many other countries experienced much less economic disruption. So, when we do a postmortem on 2020, I think we'll find what we've come to discover, which is that we weren't prepared for the pandemic. We didn't get the leadership that we need, and the hardship was far worse than it had to be. So we're going to learn a lot of lessons from how we handle this.
La future secrétaire au Trésor, Janet Yellen, a d'ailleurs qualifié les dégâts causés jusqu'à présent de tragédie américaine. Une situation qui pourrait conduire à des effets dévastateurs à long terme si elle n'est pas corrigée rapidement. Et d'ailleurs, un des derniers combats de Donald Trump est de sanctionner des entreprises chinoises. Le président américain a pris la décision début novembre d'interdire aux Américains d'investir à Pékin. Mercredi dernier, la Chambre des représentants a approuvé à l'unanimité une législation qui menace d'interdire la négociation des actions de sociétés chinoises telles que Alibaba. CNBC's Mackenzie Sigalos explains the bill passed by Congress to delist foreign companies that don't provide disclosures and why it might benefit China's growing stock exchange.
On President Trump's desk is a bill that could kick several Chinese companies off of U.S. stock exchanges and inflame an already strained relationship between Washington and Beijing. The Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act would force firms to give up their listings on Wall Street if they refuse to open their books to U.S. accounting regulators. Now, while the law technically applies to companies from any country, it's mainly targeting Chinese corporations. The bipartisan co-sponsors of the legislation said their aim was to, quote, kick deceitful Chinese companies off U.S. exchanges. And to be fair, Chinese companies trading in the U.S. are no stranger to accounting scandals. Just this year, Luckin, a Chinese coffee chain that billed itself as a rival to Starbucks, was delisted from the NASDAQ after the firm fabricated $300 million in sales. Now, if the law is passed, it could affect companies like Alibaba, oil giant PetroChina, JD.com, and more than 200 other names. Chinese companies listed on U.S. exchanges have a combined market capitalization of about $2.2 trillion, so a mass delisting would mean major movements of capital, something that experts say could backfire on American investors.
If the bill becomes law, I think these companies are going to leave our exchanges, and they're going to leave on prices that are not going to make American investors better off.
And we're not just talking about big institutional names on Wall Street. This could also affect mom and pop investors, so people like you who have bought shares in Alibaba or have your retirement savings invested in ETFs that cover Chinese companies. Now, some say that Chinese authorities wouldn't actually mind if this goes through. Let's say Alibaba does get delisted. It actually speeds up something that Beijing is already trying to do: build up its own exchanges. More major Chinese companies listing at home would be welcome news, and it wouldn't be so bad for these firms either. Chinese markets are far more sophisticated today than they were 10 years ago, so companies retrenching and listing in China wouldn't be as limiting as it once was. But analysts say that a mass delisting is actually pretty unlikely.
We don't have to be too alarmed at this point. There are several reasons for that. One is that the fact that there's a 3-year grace period, there's an opportunity for a negotiated solution, even if this legislation is signed into law.
Yeki says that Chinese regulators have also indicated that they are ready to sit down to reach a mutually acceptable solution. And there are signs that the SEC is ready to negotiate. Ultimately, we're dealing with the world's 2 largest economies, whose financial markets are becoming more and more intertwined. Decoupling the 2 is both complicated and, well, not all that advantageous for either country.
Si le projet de loi aboutit finalement à un exode des entreprises chinoises, ce serait un véritable coup dur au New York Stock Exchange et au Nasdaq. Les 2 indices perçoivent des frais d'inscription auprès de ces entreprises et bénéficient de leur volume de négociation. Les dirigeants des 2 bourses ont critiqué la législation, affirmant qu'il existe des moyens moins drastiques de résoudre le différend. Le rebond d'Alibaba le mois dernier a d'ailleurs été impressionnant. Des ventes en ligne records. C'était aussi le cas pour plusieurs plateformes en ligne et notamment pour le site de revente de baskets StockX. Selon son PDG, les jeunes de la génération Z sont les principaux clients, surtout en période de fête de fin d'année. StockX CEO Scott Cutler joins CNBC to talk about its business model.
Driven by a next generation consumer. If you look at Gen Z age 18 to 23 is fueling the emergence of the resale markets, largely because they're seeking exclusive collaborations with rare, hard to find items. And so they're turning to not only online channels, but resale markets like ours to drive this. And it is that Gen Z consumer that's driving the consumption and the direction of a lot of brands and platforms today.
I've looked, Scott, at your bestsellers over this past week or 2 that your team sent us, and a lot of them actually on that list are items that came out very recently, things that were released, say, in May, and then obviously resold fairly quickly after that. Is that the bulk of your business, people grabbing hold of something that's in short supply, reselling it, but not for a massive, massive markup relative to things that are properly retro, properly old?
So a majority of the items that transact on StockX would be outside of what you described as that release window. So these are products that we call in the back catalog. They could have been released years ago. But for this weekend, particularly the Cyber Weekend, what we saw as the best-selling products were, for example, in a new category for us in electronics, in gaming consoles, driven by both the Sony and Xbox new consoles that came to the market. And in the core market in sneakers, you had a couple of really interesting releases that came out from Nike. The Jordan 4 Fire Red, that was the #1 on the list. The #2 was something called a Jordan 1 Black Metallic Gold. But Jordan Brand and Nike led the sneaker category for the day. And then, of course, in other categories such as streetwear, this is in apparel. You know, it's been really interesting to see the rise of new brands. This year was Travis Scott. And the hottest selling item actually was the Travis Scott McDonald's red T-shirt that was released to McDonald's employees and then found their way back on our platform to be the top seller in that category. So a really dynamic weekend.
But Scott, whether it's gaming consoles or sneakers or Travis Scott T-shirts, I'm just curious about the business model, because it does seem that it thrives on these companies like Nike and Adidas and McDonald's that have these relatively limited releases, and then consumers really only have the best shot at getting them on a resale platform like yours at a significant premium. So do you think there's going to be a fatigue at some point where people say, I'm not willing to pay that premium for these products anymore?
Well, if you look at the consumer wants access to great product from great brands, and we're bullish on brands releasing product that consumers want. That's their entire business model. what brands are increasingly using are collaborations and scarcity to drive value to their brand. And of course, in the resale market, it creates opportunity and potentially economic opportunity for those people that want to, effectively buy that product directly from the brand and then resell it on a market. And so the entire industry now across multiple verticals is driven by this scarcity model that these brands are using quite effectively. And the consumers are eating up. The consumers are inspired by what they see out there in the world. They're inspired by these great products from great brands, but they want them authentically, and they want to be able to have a transparent, trusted transaction on a resale platform, which again is our model and what we're catering towards.
Scott, I'm sure you saw the news this week that Under Armour are launching the Curry brand. Given your knowledge of Air Jordans, of Yeezys, do you think that can be as successful, or is it a seriously tall order to develop a personalized brand like that to the same extent?
I think it's exciting. Again, what you're seeing with brands, and Under Armour is a perfect example of it, but you've seen it in high luxury in Louis Vuitton. You've seen it in other areas where you're finding these athletes or influencers or artists in combination with the brand, creating great products that those brands and those consumers had great affinity towards. And it's that model of dropping those products in collaboration that have been really successful for brands.
Selon Scott Cutler, les tendances à venir sont et seront conduites par une nouvelle génération de clients. Pour nous, 75% des consommateurs ont moins de 35 ans. Ce sont les pionniers, ce sont eux qui définissent ce qui est à la mode et ce qui ne l'est pas, dit-il. De plus en plus de start-up américaines se délocalisent et quittent la Californie. Trop de taxes, trop de règles pour ces entreprises nouvelle génération. StockX est basé à Détroit et désormais Elon Musk pourrait bientôt déménager au Texas. On écoute.
Levy, so Ari, is this about taxes? Is this about business considerations, or perhaps a mix of both?
Okay, well, all of the above is the answer I think you were looking for. Yeah, I mean, Elon's had operations in Texas for a long time. He's been going there for years. You've had SpaceX. SpaceX has operations there since 2003. There's a launch site in Boca Chica, which is the coastal town several hours south of Austin. And then he's been at loggerheads with the state of California really for the better part of the COVID crisis because of the restrictions. You add all that up, plus the tax issue, which of course there's no state income tax in Texas. California's is the highest in the country. And with all the money that Elon has headed in his direction for his pay reward package, it all adds up to a logical move.
I mean, Ari, one wonders whether this is the sign of more to come, and whether the work from home culture, it doesn't really apply to Tesla, this work from home culture will encourage more individuals and more businesses to make switches like that, just purely for the tax reason.
Yeah, well, we've been hearing about this for the last several months. You need only follow a number of VCs on Twitter to read about it almost a daily basis. Some well-known techie or tech investor leaving California. Often they will cite political reasons. Underneath that, there is certainly the tax implications of it. But yeah, this whole ability to work from home, the realization that you can work from anywhere, is opening up a lot of people's eyes to the reality that you don't have to be in the Bay Area, nor do you have to be in California to get the work done.
But Ari, how real are these discussions, or is this just venting to friends? Because he has children in California. He, of course, has SpaceX, which is headquartered just outside of Los Angeles. So it's not just Tesla, and it's not just the fact that he has this big Cybertruck factory in Texas. I mean, he will still have to spend a considerable amount of time in California. So is he buying real estate there? I mean, when would this potentially happen?
Well, so that's an interesting question, right? Because he said earlier this year that he's selling all his houses, and he put multiple properties in California up for sale. And he said that sort of in the context of, I don't want to own anything. Material possessions weigh me down. So you would expect that if he were to follow that rationale, he wouldn't be buying property in Texas, and therefore he wouldn't be owning property anywhere. So really, Elon can kind of go wherever he wants to go. He can be in California one week, Texas the next, and anywhere else he wants to be the next week, if he's just living out of hotels or if he's renting apartments. For tax purposes, you have to have an official residence, and that currently is still in California. But this question of what does it mean to live somewhere is an interesting one that we explored a little bit in the story.
Yeah, well, we'll see if he follows through with it. Of course, he famously was the first major businessman to pit states against each other to get them to compete for his business. Perhaps they will be competing for his income tax now. Ari Levy, we appreciate you bringing us that story today.
Le Texas n'a pas d'impôt sur le revenu des particuliers, ce qui profiterait au PDG de Tesla et SpaceX. Ces derniers mois, Elon Musk s'est d'ailleurs battu avec les responsables californiens au sujet du confinement qui avait temporairement fermé l'usine de Tesla à Fremont. En mai, le PDG avait d'ailleurs annoncé qu'il allait déplacer le constructeur automobile hors de l'État de Californie. Et en raison des restrictions de la Covid-19, la cérémonie Tusk Awards au Royaume-Uni, en partenariat avec le gestionnaire d'actifs mondial 91, s'est déroulée entièrement virtuellement. Une cérémonie annuelle pour la préservation de la faune sauvage. Le prince William en est l'ambassadeur aux côtés des organisateurs de l'événement. Il a d'ailleurs profité de l'opportunité pour alerter les dirigeants mondiaux sur l'impact de la Covid-19 en Afrique. Charlie Mayhew and sponsor Hendrik Dutoit speak about conservation has been hit by the coronavirus pandemic.
In 2013, Tusk launched its annual Conservation Awards, which, backed by His Royal Highness the Duke of Cambridge, recognise outstanding individuals and organisations across Africa for their work.
Well, normally we have a very glamorous sort of glitzy occasion here in London, but we've had to revert to effectively creating a virtual award ceremony.
Charlie, how has it impacted the work that you do, though, in general? Obviously, it has changed the experience of the Tusk Awards, but how hard has it been to navigate everything with COVID-19?
It's had a huge impact here, but the reality on the ground in Africa is such that the economic impact and crisis that has flowed from the pandemic has been really significant, mainly because tourism and the travel industry has absolutely shut down. It fell off a cliff when we all went into lockdown. And although much of Africa has not actually been hit very hard by the virus itself, the economic impact has been huge.
Since launching in 2013, the awards have been sponsored by international investment firm 91, formerly known as Investec Asset Management, which was founded in South Africa.
We, as a business, care a great deal about the communities we serve. And given now that our roots are in Africa and that we started in Africa, the balance between conservation and community has always been something that was important to us, and Tusk really exemplifies that.
Are you worried that the pandemic will sideline investments or sideline environmental issues to do with conservation because of the tough economic climate?
In the short term, it is clear that many charities, but particularly conservation charities and conservation efforts, have been hampered by the shortage of funds. Governments haven't got as much to allocate. Companies haven't got as much. But I end with a positive conclusion that the world has become aware of the importance of sustainability. And I think longer run, there is no doubt that people will care more, people will agitate more, and communities will stand up for what is really important to them rather than unbridled destruction of the environment. So actually, short-term bad news, long-term very good news.
Le tourisme et les safaris jouent un rôle crucial dans le soutien financier des travailleurs locaux, des communautés et des projets de conservation de la faune en Afrique. Le secteur a été durement touché à la suite de la pandémie et de l'arrêt des voyages internationaux. Thank you all for being with us. Merci à tous d'avoir participé à ce format 100% hybride. See you very soon for the rest of international news. À demain sur Bismart.